Machiavellian. The word immediately brings to mind backstabbing, pure calculated malice, and the villain in the shadows pulling the strings. That dark reputation is usually tied to the famous slogan, "The ends justify the means." But Niccolò Machiavelli never actually wrote those words, and that catchphrase distorts his actual philosophy. To understand what he really believed, we have to look at his actual workplace, the unstable, high-stakes environment of 15th century Renaissance Florence. Machiavelli spent his career as a mid-level civil servant, a working diplomat, and a defense organizer. He focused on keeping a fragile, experimental republic alive while it was surrounded by foreign armies and unreliable mercenary bands. His career ended when the republic fell to the returning Medici family. Following the collapse, Machiavelli was imprisoned and subjected to the strappado, a severe interrogation torture where the victim is dropped repeatedly from a rope tied to their wrists behind their back before being forced into rural exile. During that profound political ruin, he drafted Il Principe, a 16th century political treatise, known in English as The Prince, as a survival guide for unstable systems. It is the physical reality of this text that cemented his posthumous infamy. His actual framework requires leaders to master a grueling, necessary trade-off. To build institutions that last, you must replace the illusion of how the world ought to be with a command of how human nature actually behaves. When a crisis hits your organization, you are forced to figure out exactly what your leadership legitimacy is built on. This flowchart tracks the most famous trade-off in his writing, the choice between building authority on love or fear. Machiavelli points out that love is structurally fragile because human beings will withdraw their goodwill the moment their personal self-interest shifts. Fear is safer because it relies on enforceable consequences, but his rule includes a massive caveat. Fear must be built on clear, predictable standards to ensure it never crosses the line into arbitrary cruelty. In this framework, hatred is a specific, fatal condition. Perceived theft of property or personal humiliation dissolves the basic trust and compliance that keeps any institution functioning. Your team judges you by observable outcomes and consistent rules. They cannot see your hidden internal intentions, so expecting them to follow you based purely on your good motives will fail when resources get tight. Long-term organizational stability comes from the relentless discipline of managing perception and enforcing clear guardrails to ensure firmness never becomes resentment. Leadership eventually requires executing unavoidable pain. You will have to enact severe budget cuts, lay people off, or force through structural shifts that your team dislikes. This graph compares two strategies for change. If you bleed out negative changes slowly, you create prolonged paranoia. To allow for recovery, harm must be concentrated and executed all at once. However, as the second curve illustrates, the strategy for building loyalty is different. Benefits, rewards, and positive changes should be dispensed slowly, step by step, ensuring the gratitude remains fresh over time. Executing this timing requires a very specific psychological posture, which he described using the metaphor of the lion and the fox. A leader needs the strength of the lion to enforce hard boundaries and deter predators, alongside the cunning of the fox to detect traps, gather intelligence, and control the narrative. Effective leaders must be willing to absorb short-term friction. Accepting temporary villain status is often the only way to protect the long-term health and survival of the organization. Internal stability is useless if you are wiped out by fortune, the market crashes, crises, and chaotic turns of events that wash away weak systems. You can defend against fortune by building dikes in peacetime. This means accumulating cash reserves, building supply chain redundancies, and enforcing operational readiness long before a crisis arrives. Relying on borrowed power is structurally fatal. Depending heavily on mercenaries, outside contractors, or shifting alliances for your core security leaves you vulnerable when their incentives no longer align with yours. This is exactly why leaders who rely entirely on charisma and belief fail. Influence is powerless against a true shock if you haven't built enforceable mechanisms to back it up. For a cultural shift or a movement to survive, you have to hard-code it into your systems. You build it into your audits, your governance, and your hiring practices, rather than just giving speeches. True sovereign control requires a massive, unglamorous upfront investment in your own capabilities. If an ally or a vendor can simply turn off your access, you do not actually own your power. This quadrant chart identifies exactly who should avoid this framework. It is built for high-stakes environments, not stable sectors where likability is the primary metric. Founders, crisis managers, and professionals in volatile systems operate in the top right quadrant, the optimal zone for Machiavellian pragmatism. Ultimately, these teachings provide a defensive toolkit for protecting your life's work from the sheer volatility of human systems. It is time to strip away 500 years of mythology and dive into the actual blueprints of power, strategy, and resilience. To master these operational tactics, pick up our new release, The Realist's Playbook, available now at the link in the description.